Hey guys, tonight we wander through the echoing halls of my family home, where the smell of old carpet mixes with the faint trace of cinnamon from the kitchen, and the chandelier swings ever so slightly, like it's gossiping with itself. Honestly, you probably won't survive the awkwardness I'm about to relive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, and what time it is over there. I love mapping out this audience of night owls. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. I shuffle into the living room, shoes squeaking faintly against the polished wood, and immediately catch the scent of judgment in the air. My relatives, clustered on the floral-patterned sofa and antique chairs, glance at me with that special mix of disdain and disbelief that only family can perfect. Really? You think you deserve any part of this inheritance? Uncle Mark's voice slices through the room, casual, but loaded. It's the kind of question you don't answer, because any response will either make you smaller, or give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I grin just slightly, just enough to suggest I'm listening, but not enough to let them see the storm brewing behind my eyes. The table is littered with desserts that are as outdated as the wallpaper. Tiny, stiff cookies that snap when touched, and a bowl of gelatin that wiggles in defiance of gravity. My cousin Lisa, who somehow manages to look perpetually perfect even in sweatpants, smirks at me over her latte. I can feel the judgment bouncing off the walls, thick as humidity in a summer attic. These moments, ordinary as they seem, have a way of engraving themselves into memory, like that time I tripped over the welcome mat and spilled coffee on my own shoes. As I sit quietly, nursing a glass of water, a dusty wind chime rattles somewhere in the hallway. The sound is so random, so unexpected, that I almost laugh out loud. Nice timing, old thing, I murmur under my breath. A strange comfort arises from small absurdities like this. The universe's little nod that life isn't entirely cruel. These tiny, overlooked details often anchor my memories, and I notice them now, almost like historians might note the triviality of daily life in their studies. Scholars still debate whether such minutiae hold significance, but for me, every creak and shuffle is a breadcrumb leading to the path I never realized I'd walk. I recall the evening's main insult, the collective snicker when Aunt Marge implied that I would never measure up to handle any family property. They called me naive, irresponsible, and worse, a daydreamer. Each word felt like a pinprick, but instead of breaking, I let it simmer, quietly marking each slight for future reckoning. Humor became my shield. I chuckled silently, imagining them in situations that demanded true grit, like parallel parking a yacht or negotiating a land deal. Somehow, picturing their fumbling faces made the insult sting less. My hands tap against the rim of my glass as the conversation swirls around me. Trivialities, gossip, debates over furniture restoration, and yet, I am acutely aware that all these people see is my current standing, insignificant, laughable, but inside, a quiet ember ignites. I imagine the rooms, the old floorboards under my feet, and the portraits of ancestors who likely rolled their eyes at similar family nonsense. I let their whispers wash over me like a distant tide, taking careful note of each comment, each laugh, each subtle glance. And then, almost imperceptibly, I begin to dream, not recklessly, but methodically. I sketch in my mind the outlines of a future, where I am no longer on the receiving end of their sneers. The idea is absurdly satisfying. Me walking through these very halls, yet now with the quiet power that only comes from owning what was once denied. I picture myself sipping tea in the same awkward chairs, while my critics sit silently, perhaps reconsidering their judgments. It's oddly calming, like imagining a perfect sleep while the rain taps against the window pane. The room grows warmer, the smell of cinnamon stronger, as if the house itself is conspiring to plant these visions in my mind. And in that moment I realize something important. While I sit here, small and underestimated, I am already collecting the pieces I'll need. Each laugh, each look, each offhand comment becomes part of a ledger that only I am keeping. Some might call it grudging, others strategic, but for me, it is simply awareness. the first step toward turning rejection into reclamation. Aunt Marge moves to pour more gelatin into bowls, and the wobbling, quivering dessert seems oddly symbolic, like my early potential, unappreciated, yet resilient, and I can't help but smile at the absurdity. Humor, I decide, will be my companion on this path, along with a kind of soft, simmering patience. It's a strange beginning, almost mundane, yet perfectly set to guide the journey I am about to take. The first page of a story they never knew I was writing. The ember that sparked in section 1 grows quietly, like sunlight sneaking through the blinds early in the morning. I walk out of the living room, careful not to step on the creaky patch of floorboards that complain under my weight, and I let myself wander into the backyard. The grass is overgrown, a tangle of green and gold, and the scent of wet earth after a forgotten rain fills my nose. Birds chatter somewhere in the trees, their casual morning squabble oddly comforting, like the world is carrying on without noticing the drama I just endured. You know, little details like this make me smile, because I realize that life, messy, chaotic, judgment-filled life, moves on whether my relatives approve or not. I remember clearly the sting of their comments. "You'll never manage anything," Uncle Mark had said, pinching the air with his fingers as though the very idea of me handling property was laughable. And yet, standing here, with the sunlight warming my skin, I feel something else. Determination. It's funny how humiliation can serve as fuel. I imagine telling them one day, with all the calm in the world, "Remember when you thought I couldn't?" The thought alone is delicious. Scholars still debate whether humiliation can be a productive motivator, but in my case, it's already shaping the architecture of my future. That afternoon, I pull out my notebook, dog-eared, coffee-stained, but filled with meticulous plans. I begin jotting down notes about small investments, hidden opportunities, and forgotten properties within our family's sprawling assets. Every line I write feels like a secret ceremony, as if I'm inscribing the first steps toward silent revenge. The pen scratches against paper, creating a rhythm almost ASMR-like, and I smile, realizing that this quiet, obsessive planning is far more satisfying than any confrontation or argument. My thoughts drift to absurdities. For example, I notice an old garden gnome half buried in moss, tilting at a perfect 45-degree angle. I chuckle softly. Even gnomes understand the importance of leaning into opportunity. It's ridiculous. Yes, but these little moments remind me that the world has its quirks, and maybe it's okay if my own plans are a bit unorthodox. A cloud shifts above, casting a moving shadow across the backyard, and for a fleeting moment, I swear the gnome winks at me. You probably wouldn't survive my imagination, but it keeps me grounded. By evening, I'm scanning online databases, property records, and old family documents. Each page reveals surprises, assets I never knew existed, plots of land long forgotten, small estates abandoned due to bureaucracy or neglect. I record every address, every odd detail, every loophole that might work in my favor. Some properties are laughably tiny, yet the thrill of discovery makes my pulse quicken. I can practically hear Uncle Mark scoff if he knew I was tracking these obscure plots, and that image makes me grin uncontrollably. A sudden noise startles me. The squeak of a closet door inside the house, opening without a breeze. I freeze, listening. Maybe it's the wind, or maybe it's the old house settling, but my mind, already keyed into secrets, imagines a past relative's spirit quietly observing my work, like a curious historian. I whisper, "Welcome to the plan," and note it in my mental ledger. Unexpected little details like this always sneak into my days, blending reality with the peculiar, nudging me toward patience. Night falls, and I sit on the back porch, feeling the cool air against my arms. I sip warm tea and let my thoughts settle into strategy. I picture timelines, calculated moves, and small, careful victories that will eventually snowball. Humor keeps me company, imagining my cousins fumbling through paperwork, mispronouncing legal terms, or tripping over their own sense of superiority. I chuckle softly, the sound mingling with the rustling leaves. The absurdity doesn't lessen my focus, it enhances it, sharpening my resolve. By the time stars scatter across the night sky, I feel the first real taste of power, quiet and unassuming, like a cat perched on a rooftop watching the city below. I imagine Uncle Mark and Aunt Marge staring at their sprawling properties someday, realizing they had overlooked the quiet, underestimated one. The satisfaction is soft, simmering, not loud or violent. Just the patient knowledge that I am the one charting the course. Scholars still argue whether strategic patience trumps bold action. But as I sip the last of my tea, I think I'm already seeing the answer in motion. I make my way inside, careful of the floorboards that betray each step, and glance at the old photographs lining the hallway. Faces stare back, judgment, pride, expectation, and I nod softly to myself. Each sneer, each chuckle at my expense, is now a stepping stone. I tuck my notebook into my bag and whisper, "We begin." The house feels alive, conspiratorial, as though it understands I'm no longer the one to be dismissed. Morning light spills across my apartment, catching dust motes in a golden haze, and I stretch lazily before diving into my first small victories. I sip coffee, strong and bitter, almost scalding my tongue, but it's the kind of discomfort I secretly enjoy. It reminds me that nothing worthwhile comes easy. Today, I'm reviewing minor investments I made quietly over the past months. A neglected building in the outskirts of town, a small parking lot no one cared about, and a tiny duplex that the bank had written off as unprofitable. Each acquisition is modest, almost laughable in the grand scheme, yet every little success fuels a quiet thrill. Scholars still debate whether incremental wins create momentum or just illusions of progress, but I already feel the surge of both. I open my laptop and smile at the numbers blinking back at me. One property already shows a modest appreciation. Another tenant has just signed a long-term lease. I can't resist a tiny, almost mischievous giggle, like someone who's found out the punchline to a joke before anyone else. The absurdity is not lost on me. While my relatives sip overpriced lattes and critique my irrelevance, I am quietly building a foundation beneath their noses. It's like planting seeds in a garden they didn't know existed, and I almost snort imagining their shocked faces when it finally blooms. By mid-morning, I'm on the phone negotiating a minor renovation for the duplex. The handyman arrives, whistling a tune that makes me wonder if he's secretly a jazz musician moonlighting as a contractor. I tap my pen against the notebook, feeling the soft rhythm, letting the small details anchor me. Humor sneaks in again. The handyman trips over a pile of dusty wood, looks embarrassed, and mutters, "I swear I do this professionally." I laugh silently, because even small chaos has its charm. A surprising detail comes to light when examining old blueprints of one neglected building. A storage room tucked behind an unused staircase appears unusually spacious. I run my fingers along the faded lines on the paper, imagining what might be inside. A hidden nook, a forgotten safe, maybe a treasure left by a careless former owner. The idea makes my pulse quicken, blending the mundane with the unexpected, turning a simple building inspection into a mini-adventure. Scholars still argue whether curiosity is a survival trait or just a quirk of personality, but I feel both in that moment, and it's intoxicating. The afternoon stretches lazily. I meet with my accountant, a quietly witty woman who has become an unexpected ally. She notices discrepancies in some old property tax documents and laughs softly. "They really didn't see you coming, did they?" Her amusement mirrors my own, a shared acknowledgement that the underdog sometimes writes the rules. It's a subtle victory, yet it matters, a reminder that allies, even unplanned, can accelerate the climb. Later, I walk past a thrift shop, drawn to a jacket that seems oddly familiar, like it's whispering secrets about someone else's past. I try it on, and it hangs slightly too large, but the feel of worn leather against my fingers sparks an unexpected warmth. Small, quirky details like this, the creak of a zipper, the faint scent of mothballs, become part of the day's story, weaving a tapestry that blends reality with anticipation. Life is absurd, and sometimes absurdity is a friend. Evening brings a phone call from a tenant who's thrilled about minor renovations. Their excitement, though small, reinforces the feeling that these small victories accumulate silently. I make a mental note to keep every detail logged, every small success measured. It's a ledger of progress, and it feels almost sacred. Humor bubbles again. The tenant mispronounces my name, inventing a playful nickname, and I chuckle softly. Such small absurdities soften the edges of tension, yet they don't diminish purpose. By nightfall, I sit at the edge of my balcony, listening to distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. The city hums, alive with mundane energy, yet in its pulse I sense potential. Every small property, every minor win, every unexpected discovery is a brick in a path no one suspects I'm laying. Scholars still debate whether incremental effort is superior to bold leaps, but I lean back and feel both strategies weaving into something cohesive. The quiet thrill of measured progress feels deliciously powerful. Finally, I closed my laptop and reviewed the day's notes. Each line is a small monument to effort, foresight, and subtle rebellion. I imagine my relatives discussing their own trivial concerns, completely unaware that I am quietly accumulating assets, experience, and confidence. It's strangely calming, a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is slow, meticulous, and nearly invisible. I take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of satisfaction, letting it sink in like sunlight through a window. The next morning I returned to the family files I had discovered months earlier. Now armed with patience and a growing sense of purpose, I spread documents across the kitchen table, letting the sunlight illuminate the yellowed edges and faded handwriting. Each paper holds more than numbers or names. They carry whispers of decisions made long ago, forgotten spaces, and abandoned properties. I trace a finger along a list of neglected land plots, imagining the potential in each square foot. Scholars still debate whether patterns in overlooked assets are coincidence or destiny, but to me, every entry feels like a hidden invitation. While flipping through an old ledger, I notice a curious anomaly. A property that no one in the family seems to remember claiming. The address is small, nestled between commercial buildings, but something about it pulls at me. Perhaps it's the odd way the numbers are written, almost as if the clerk who recorded them was distracted by a passing bird. I make a note to investigate in person, excitement rising like steam from a teapot. Even mundane discoveries can feel like adventure when the stakes are personal. I venture to the property later that day. The street smells faintly of freshly baked bread, mixed with the tang of exhaust fumes, an oddly comforting contrast. The building itself is unassuming, peeling paint, a sagging awning, but as I walk inside, the unexpected catches me. A stack of boxes, covered in dust and cobwebs, sits forgotten in the corner. I carefully lift one, revealing old ledgers and letters, yellowed with age. I chuckle softly. Who knew family negligence could feel so thrilling? Humor, after all, keeps even the most tedious investigation lively. I spend hours cataloging each detail, jotting notes into my ever-growing notebook. Even the smallest observations are significant. The creak of the wooden floor, the faint echo of my own footsteps, the way sunlight slants through a cracked window. These subtle sensations anchor me in the moment, creating a rhythm that's both calming and energizing. A squirrel darts across the roof, and I pause to watch, marveling at its fearless curiosity. Life's little eccentricities, I realize, mirror my own. Back home, I uncover another anomaly. A forgotten deed tucked inside an old envelope. The edges are frayed, the ink smudged, but the promise of ownership is unmistakable. My heart quickens, not from greed, but from the thrill of discovery. The intoxicating knowledge that even the most minor oversight can become leverage. I imagine my relatives' faces if they ever learned that I've quietly pieced together these hidden assets. The absurdity of the situation makes me laugh softly. Sometimes, life writes the best scripts without warning. As evening falls, I walk past the neglected garden behind the property. Overgrown vines tangle around a rusted gate, creating shadows that dance in the fading light. I run my hands along the cold metal and pause, listening. The quiet hum of the city blends with the rustling leaves, creating an almost meditative atmosphere. Scholars still argue about the psychological impact of solitary exploration, but for me, it's grounding. A reminder that even small, overlooked spaces can hold immense potential. Dinner is a simple affair: leftover pasta, a slice of bread, a cup of tea, but the mundane meal feels like a victory. I sip slowly, savoring the warmth and letting the day's discoveries settle into my mind. Humor drifts in again. I catch my reflection in the window, hair messy, eyes bright, and I whisper to myself, who knew owning nothing could feel like holding everything? The thought makes me grin. Absurdity has a way of sweetening ambition. Later, I make a ritual of reviewing every note, cross-referencing addresses, and imagining the future. Each detail, no matter how trivial, becomes part of a blueprint. The squeak of the floorboards behind me reminds me that old houses have a memory of their own, and I smile, imagining them quietly cheering me on. Scholars still debate whether intuition or analysis drives success, but I feel a harmony between the two, a soft, deliberate rhythm guiding each step forward. Night comes, and I sit on the balcony, letting the city hum surround me. The faint scent of rain lingers, mingling with the warm glow of streetlights. Every minor property, every overlooked ledger, every accidental discovery feels like a piece of a puzzle finally aligning. Humor, patience, and curiosity have carried me this far, and I know the journey has only just begun. In the quiet, I whisper a small vow to uncover every secret, reclaim every lost piece, and do it all with subtle, unassuming triumph. Weeks pass, and the long game begins to take shape. I wake each morning with a sense of purpose so precise it almost feels like a ritual. The alarm clock buzzes, coffee brews, and I move through the motions, but each step carries intention. Every email I send, every call I make, is part of a carefully choreographed strategy to acquire the forgotten corners of my family's empire. I'm no longer reacting, I'm orchestrating. Scholars still debate whether patience or speed yields greater success, but I can feel that deliberate pacing is my ally, like a slow river carving through rock. I make a habit of revisiting each property in person. One morning I walk down a cobbled street where the sunlight hits puddles from last night's rain, reflecting a fractured mosaic of the sky. I step carefully, aware that any sudden noise might betray my presence to curious neighbors or nosy caretakers. Yet, each quiet inspection fills me with confidence. Humor slips in unbidden. I notice a cat perched on a low roof, watching me as though I'm the intruder. I imagine explaining acquisitions to the feline board of directors, and I can't help but chuckle softly. Some properties are trivial, yet they offer subtle advantages. A small rental unit with a leaky faucet becomes a chance to negotiate contracts, to test my growing knowledge of property law, and to anticipate obstacles. Other assets, hidden behind neglected hedges or dusty windows, reveal themselves as treasures in disguise. I make notes, taking careful measurements, photographing details, and mentally cataloging opportunities. The meticulous nature of this work feels almost meditative, a gentle hum beneath the tension of the larger plan. Occasionally, family gossip reaches my ears. A neighbor mentions that Uncle Mark is confused about recent tax assessments, or that Aunt Marge has been asking questions about tenants. I listen without intervening, savoring the irony. The absurdity of their oversight is almost comedic. While they fuss over trifles, I quietly accumulate influence. Scholars still debate the ethical line between cunning and manipulation, but for now, I let the moment reinforce my patience. One afternoon, a strange detail catches my attention: a discarded jacket draped over a fence, faintly smelling of mothballs and tobacco. Something about it seems oddly familiar. I pick it up, noticing the frayed lining and worn buttons, and chuckle at the thought that even lost garments might hold stories. It reminds me that life often hides meaning in the most mundane places, that success can emerge from overlooked, unexpected corners. Humor and curiosity walk hand in hand, guiding me gently forward. I begin negotiating minor acquisitions. One landlord, unaware of the property's potential, offers favorable terms. I listen carefully, smiling quietly at the absurd advantage. The small victories accumulate: a signed lease here, a minor renovation there. Each success is a step toward the larger plan, like pebbles forming a path across a river. The quiet rhythm of these victories reinforces the notion that patience, strategy, and attentiveness are just as powerful as bold, reckless action. Evenings are my reflection time. I sit in my study, a cup of tea steaming in hand, reviewing notes, imagining future transactions, and savoring the quiet satisfaction of forward motion. A slight breeze stirs the curtains, carrying faint sounds of the city. The distant honk of a horn, the murmur of voices in an alley. These ordinary details become touchstones, grounding me in reality while I construct my vision of the future. Humor flits through my thoughts again. The idea that one day they might learn the quiet power of overlooked diligence makes me grin softly. By nightfall, I'm exhausted yet exhilarated. Each step, each discovery, each negotiation is a quiet triumph, and I feel the invisible threads of influence extending outward, knitting together a tapestry of assets I will one day control. Scholars still argue whether strategic patience trumps bold action, but I sit back, letting the rhythm of progress reassure me. The long game is in motion, and the foundation is solid, built from curiosity, humor, and a relentless, unassuming determination. It doesn't take long before family gossip begins to ripple through the social grapevine. I hear it first at the corner cafe, where the barista mentions that Aunt Marge was puzzled about recent property inquiries, and that Uncle Mark has been muttering about unusual accounting statements. I sip my latte, careful not to spill it, and let the news wash over me. There's a thrill in knowing that the quiet, patient work I've done is starting to provoke ripples without any effort on my part. Humor sneaks in, imagining them scurrying like frantic squirrels while I stroll past, oblivious to their panic. Scholars still debate whether awareness of gossip influences strategy, but I find it reassuring. The peculiarities of the day present themselves in small, unexpected ways. While inspecting one of the neglected properties, a door creaks open of its own accord, revealing a closet filled with old coats, hats, and scarves. I pause, inhaling the musty scent and chuckling softly. Each coat seems to whisper the forgotten stories of past tenants and family members. Odd details like these, rustling fabric, the distant drip of water, the echo of my own footsteps, anchor me to the present, even as my mind races ahead, planning acquisitions and strategies. I begin noticing patterns in the gossip. Certain relatives are more vocal, their words tinged with envy or disbelief. Others whisper cautiously, unsure how to process my emerging presence in family affairs. I let it roll off me, storing the information like tiny puzzle pieces. Each conversation, overheard or accidentally revealed, becomes a resource. Humor helps me absorb it. I imagine Uncle Mark trying to pronounce asset acquisition and stumbling over syllables, his confusion almost poetic. Mid-afternoon I meet with a potential ally, an old friend of the family who has knowledge of obscure legal loopholes and forgotten deeds. The meeting is both practical and surreal. He wears a vintage scarf that smells faintly of cedar and an unexpected hint of tobacco, like a relic from another era. As we pore over documents, he points out minor discrepancies that could give me leverage in acquiring overlooked properties. I grin to myself. It's almost comical how serendipity seems to favor quiet diligence. Scholars still argue whether luck or preparation drives success, but today I feel the perfect balance. Returning to a small rental property later, I encounter a tenant who has a habit of leaving odd hand-painted signs on doors. One reads, "Welcome to the land of forgotten keys." I chuckle, marveling at the creativity and absurdity of everyday life. Even in the midst of strategy and acquisition, these quirks remind me that life is unpredictable. The tiny eccentricities, squeaky floorboards, the smell of old wood, the unexpected rustle of a curtain, become companions, marking the rhythm of my growing empire. By evening, the city hums outside my window. The distant drone of traffic, the faint bark of a dog, and the soft clinking of dishes from neighboring apartments create a symphony of ordinary life. I sit quietly, notebook in hand, reviewing the progress of the day. Subtle details, emails answered, phone calls returned, minor inspections completed, accumulate into an almost imperceptible pattern of success. Humor drifts in once more. I imagine Aunt Marge consulting a compass to navigate my moves, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. Night settles like a velvet curtain, soft and absorbing. I walk through my apartment, the floorboards groaning underfoot, and pause to consider how far I've come. Each small, seemingly mundane effort, the calls, the visits, the detailed notes, feels like a quiet rebellion against the dismissive judgment I once endured. Scholars still debate whether incremental effort or bold leaps shape destiny, but I feel the evidence in every soft glow of streetlights, in every creak and rustle that punctuates my day. In bed, I let the day's events settle. The faint ticking of a clock and the whisper of the fan create a lullaby of subtle victories. Each piece of gossip, each strange detail, each ally quietly aiding me, all feed into the slow crescendo of influence I am building, and as I drift toward sleep I smile softly, imagining the ripple effect that will one day reach every corner of the family empire. Humor, strategy, and patience, quietly, steadily, have become my trinity of progress. One unexpectedly gray morning, I receive a call from someone I hadn't anticipated, an old family friend, distant but influential, who offers to share crucial information about some overlooked properties. I pause, listening to the soft crackle of his voice over the phone. It's strange how life presents allies in the most subtle ways. People who appear innocuous but carry the keys to opportunity. Scholars still debate whether networks or skill are more critical for success, but in that moment I feel the balance tipping in my favor. Humor creeps in. I imagine him as a secret agent clandestinely delivering property intelligence while whistling a tune from a 1980s sitcom. I decide to meet him at a quiet cafe tucked between two old bookstores. The smell of roasted coffee beans mingles with the faint musk of old paper, and I take a deep breath, letting the atmosphere sharpen my focus. He slides a folder across the table, the edges frayed and corners curling. Inside, I discover detailed maps, forgotten deeds, and notes on properties even my relatives seem unaware of. The absurdity of holding these secrets in a mundane cafe makes me chuckle softly, power disguised as paperwork. As we talk, I notice the subtle quirks around me. A barista hums a tune while polishing glasses, a cat dozes lazily on a windowsill, and the faint aroma of vanilla from a nearby pastry stand drifts through the air. The ordinary world continues around this extraordinary moment, grounding me while reinforcing the excitement of discovery. Scholars still argue whether environmental cues enhance decision-making, but I feel it intuitively. Every little sensory detail amplifies my awareness and sharpens my strategy. Returning home, I cross-reference the folder's information with my own notes. It's meticulous work, verifying boundaries, checking ownership records, noting structural conditions, and imagining potential tenants. The process feels almost meditative, the scratch of pen on paper rhythmically punctuating my thoughts. Humor finds its way in again. I picture Aunt Marge trying to trace these properties on an outdated map, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion. The mental image makes me grin, a soft, private amusement. Later in the afternoon, I visit one of the newly identified properties. The building is unremarkable from the street, but inside, I discover a curious old staircase leading to a storage loft. The dust is thick, motes swirling in the sunlight filtering through grimy windows. I run my hand along the banister, feeling the worn grooves beneath my fingertips. The space exudes an almost whimsical mystery, and I can't help but whisper to myself, every corner has a story, and I'm about to write the next chapter. Scholars still debate whether curiosity drives innovation, but for me, it fuels both ambition and joy. A minor confrontation occurs when a caretaker notices me taking notes. I smile politely, explaining that I'm a potential buyer, though I offer no further details. The tension is fleeting but instructive. Even small social interactions are valuable lessons in negotiation and perception. Humor sneaks in once more. I imagine Uncle Mark watching this scene unfold, eyebrows raised in scandalized disbelief. The thought is satisfying, a quiet undercurrent of amusement in the midst of strategic work. As evening descends, I sit by a window, watching city lights flicker against the darkening sky. Each property discovered, each note taken, each ally engaged, forms a lattice of possibility. I let the rhythm of daily victories sink in, the subtle power of quietly connecting dots others overlook. Scholars still argue about the relative influence of strategy versus luck, but in this quiet moment, I sense both in harmony. The city hums like a gentle lullaby, and I smile softly, imagining the ripple effect of my actions extending outward. Finally, I retreat to my study, tea in hand, reviewing the day's discoveries. Each piece of information feels like a brick, building a foundation no one can see but me. Humor continues to punctuate my thoughts. The idea that they might stumble across my progress, bewildered and flustered, is oddly comforting. I let the soft glow of the desk lamp and the distant city sounds lull me into reflection. Patience, curiosity, and unexpected allies have begun to shape a pattern. A quiet, deliberate ascent toward reclaiming what I was once denied. The morning sun filters through half-closed blinds, casting stripes of light across my desk. Today is the day I make my first major acquisition, a property that had long been overlooked by everyone, even my own family. My stomach flutters with excitement, tempered by a calm focus. I sip a strong espresso, the bitterness anchoring me, and review every clause of the contract. Scholars still debate whether confidence or preparation drives success, but I feel both coursing quietly through my veins. Humor creeps in. I imagine Uncle Mark fumbling over the word mortgage and nearly tipping his chair back in shock if he knew I was orchestrating this. Arriving at the property, I notice the small, seemingly trivial details that others overlook. A faded welcome mat, cracked windowsills, and the faint smell of mildew mingle in the air. I walk through each room, my footsteps echoing off the high ceilings, imagining the tenants who will come and go, the small renovations I'll implement, and the subtle control I will exert. I smile quietly, letting their assumptions work in my favor. And I almost laugh out loud. Someone like me, apparently, is exactly the person who will now hold the keys. Scholars still debate whether humor in negotiations enhances influence, but I feel it subtly strengthens my position. Signing the contract feels like an understated victory. The paper feels cool and solid beneath my fingers, a tangible symbol of a silent triumph. I imagine walking through this property months from now, knowing it belongs to me, and I can't help but smile. There's an absurd satisfaction in quietly taking control of something everyone else thought insignificant. Even the minor imperfections, the peeling paint, the squeaky hinges, become endearing markers of potential rather than flaws. Afterwards, I take a moment to explore the surrounding area. A small alleyway behind the building reveals a hidden courtyard, overgrown but full of character. Sunlight glints off cracked tiles, and a pigeon coos from a nearby ledge. Humor drifts through my thoughts. I imagine the courtyard as a secret garden for scheming, plotting, and quietly laughing at the obliviousness of my relatives. Scholars still debate whether the environment impacts motivation, but here, it undeniably fuels my imagination. Returning home, I update my growing ledger of acquisitions. Every address, every minor renovation, every tenant interaction is meticulously recorded. The rhythm of this process is soothing, almost meditative. Even the mundane details, the sound of my pen scratching against paper, the faint hum of the refrigerator, blend into a comforting backdrop. I pause to sip tea, smiling at the absurdity of feeling this sense of triumph over a modest building, but knowing full well it is the first domino in a much larger plan. By evening, I let myself wander through the property once more, taking in the spaces with quiet reverence. I notice a faint scuff on the staircase, the odd way sunlight catches on a small mirror, and the gentle draft that whispers through the hallways. Each tiny observation reinforces my connection to the space, and I imagine the subtle satisfaction of watching my relatives' expressions when they eventually realize what I've accomplished. Humor sneaks in again. I picture Aunt Marge's jaw dropping in slow motion, a silent gasp echoing through the corridors of my mind. Night settles softly, the city's distant hum mingling with the faint rustle of curtains in the apartment. Scholars still debate the balance between patience and bold action, but I feel a quiet certainty, careful planning, attention to detail, and a touch of humor can transform overlooked opportunities into undeniable successes. As I close my notebook, I whisper softly to myself, this is only the beginning. The following days are dedicated to subtle maneuvers, small adjustments that will ripple into larger consequences later. I review every lease, every clause, every minor oversight in contracts I've gathered over the past months. It's meticulous, almost meditative work, a soft scratching of pen on paper, the faint hum of my desk lamp, the occasional creak of the floorboards. Humor drifts through my thoughts. I imagine Uncle Mark trying to follow my careful edits, muttering to himself as he struggles with terminology. Scholars still debate whether patience or decisiveness carries more weight in strategic endeavors. But in this quiet orchestration, I find both harmonizing. I start with the minor legal adjustments. Nothing overtly aggressive, just slight clarifications, corrections of inconsistencies, and subtle insertions that shift control in my favor. It's a delicate dance. Every move must appear routine, every action unremarkable. A small victory, executed with precision, brings satisfaction. I almost laugh aloud at one clause here, one notation there, and the foundation of quiet power solidifies. Scholars still argue about the ethics of such maneuvers, but I remind myself that foresight and strategy are not wrong. They are simply necessary. The process is peppered with little absurdities. A neighbor's cat repeatedly jumps onto my papers, scattering notes. I sigh softly, but can't help chuckling. Even felines have a sense of timing. I gently gather the papers, noting how these minor interruptions add texture to the day's rhythm. The ordinary world continues its march outside my window, but each small detail, each tiny distraction blends into the tapestry of my strategy. Humor softens the edges, allowing focus without rigidity. Midday, I receive an unexpected call from a tenant who questions a minor clause. I smile and clarify calmly, knowing full well that this small conversation strengthens my position. The absurdity is not lost on me. The same individuals who dismissed me as unworthy are now tangentially dependent on my careful attention. Scholars still debate the psychological impact of perceived control, but I feel it in every nod, every acknowledgement of my competence. I spend the afternoon revisiting one of my early acquisitions. The building, modest as it is, hums with potential. I wander through the hallways, noting the texture of walls, the echo of footsteps, the gentle sway of an old ceiling fan. Each small observation informs future actions, reinforcing that even mundane environments carry critical lessons. Humor drifts in again. A loose floorboard squeaks exactly when I step on it, as if testing my patience, and I chuckle softly. By evening, I cross-reference all my subtle revisions with the family's knowledge, or lack thereof. They remain oblivious to the silent restructuring happening right under their noses. I imagine their confusion, the slow dawning of awareness months from now, and a quiet satisfaction settles in my chest. Scholars still debate whether stealth or confrontation achieves lasting results, but for me, the quiet path feels both effective and strangely satisfying. Night brings reflection. I sit on the balcony, the city's distant murmur wrapping around me. Each small correction, each subtle adjustment, feels like a gentle wind shaping a landscape of possibilities. Humor, observation, and patience have begun to weave together a tapestry of influence that I can quietly control. Even the mundane details, the hum of a refrigerator, the ticking of a clock, blend into a rhythm that reassures me. Every deliberate act is a step toward reclamation. Before sleep, I review my ledger, noting each minor success. The subtle power of quiet strategy is intoxicating. A series of small, seemingly inconsequential steps accumulating into undeniable influence. Scholars still argue about the efficacy of such an approach, but I feel the rhythm intuitively. Humor and patience are my constant companions, guiding each move, softening tension, and transforming mundane details into strategic advantage. In the stillness of night, I whisper softly, every step counts. Morning arrives with the faint hum of traffic outside, blending with the subtle scent of coffee brewing in my kitchen. Today, I focus on a property that had once been dismissed as insignificant by Uncle Mark. I walk the grounds, letting the overgrown weeds brush against my shoes, noticing the slight tilt of a garden gate, the way sunlight hits the cracked pathway. Every small detail feels meaningful. Scholars still debate whether attention to minutiae or broad vision drives long-term success, but to me, they work hand in hand. Humor bubbles quietly. I imagine Aunt Marge tripping over the very weeds she once ignored, symbolic karma in miniature. Inside, the building holds odd surprises. An old radiator rattles as if complaining about its long-neglected life. I run my fingers along a dusty banister, noting the scratches and small dents. Each mark a story of the people who passed through. These imperfections, far from discouraging me, spark imagination. Perhaps a minor renovation here, a subtle aesthetic tweak there, and the property transforms without anyone suspecting my hand. Humor drifts in again. The radiator seems to sigh in exaggerated relief, as though approving my intentions. Back at my apartment, I review leases and rental agreements. A tenant had accidentally highlighted an inconsistency in a contract. A minor detail, yet one I can leverage subtly to strengthen my position. I smile softly. The very people who once doubted my competence are now unknowingly reinforcing my authority. Scholars still argue whether control or perception holds more sway, but this delicate interplay delights me. Each small correction, each gentle adjustment, feels like weaving a hidden web of influence. The afternoon brings an unexpected discovery. While walking the neighborhood, I notice a small, forgotten alley leading to a courtyard filled with abandoned furniture. I step carefully, inhaling the musty scent of decayed wood and old fabric. Humor sneaks in. I imagine the furniture holding a secret society meeting for ghosts of past tenants, silently applauding my stealthy acquisitions. I catalogue the space meticulously, noting its potential for storage, minor renovations, or even leasing. It is another brick in the expanding foundation of my quiet empire. A call from my accountant confirms the first small dividend from a recently acquired property. The numbers are modest but symbolic, proof that strategic patience yields tangible results. I sip my tea slowly, savoring the quiet satisfaction. Humor drifts into my thoughts. I picture Uncle Mark checking his own statements, bewildered that I've quietly begun to outmaneuver him without a single confrontation. Scholars still debate the power of incremental gains versus sweeping moves, but today, the quiet victories feel like poetry. Evening falls, and I wander through the apartment, listening to the distant hum of neighbors and the soft creak of the floorboards. Each property, each minor success, each subtle maneuver is a note in a symphony only I can hear. Humor punctuates my reflections. I imagine Aunt Marge trying to follow my moves like a detective in a children's mystery novel, utterly confounded by my patient rhythm. The absurdity of these thoughts is oddly comforting, reminding me that life has a sense of humor, even in its lessons. Before bed, I return to my ledger, cross-referencing acquisitions, minor adjustments, and newly discovered opportunities. Each entry reinforces the rhythm I've established, slow, deliberate, and almost invisible to the untrained eye. The quiet thrill of strategy, combined with the subtle amusement of imagining my family's eventual astonishment, forms a lullaby of focus and satisfaction. Scholars still debate whether subtlety or boldness defines success, but in my growing empire of overlooked assets, subtlety reigns supreme. As night settles, I close the ledger and sip the last of my tea. The city hums softly outside, a lullaby of distant life and unnoticed movement. Every detail, the creak of a door, the faint scent of old wood, the distant bark of a dog, anchors me to the present while reinforcing the magnitude of what is quietly unfolding. Humor, patience, and meticulous attention have begun to form a rhythm, a steady pulse that promises quiet triumph. I whisper softly to myself, the smallest steps carry the greatest weight. Dawn arrives with a faint chill in the air, making the apartment feel simultaneously empty and alive. I wrap a thin sweater around my shoulders and pull my notebook closer, reviewing the week's progress. Minor victories, obscure properties, unexpected tenants, and hidden courtyards. It all adds up to an invisible lattice of influence, slowly stretching across the city. Humor drifts quietly in the background. I imagine Uncle Mark trying to navigate my meticulously organized notes, muttering incomprehensible words like equity and escrow in flustered disbelief. Scholars still debate whether laughter or persistence strengthens strategic resolve, but today I feel both. Mid-morning, I visit a neglected duplex I had recently acquired. The street smells faintly of rain-soaked pavement and fresh pastries from a nearby bakery. I walk slowly, noticing the subtle imperfections that previous owners ignored: cracked tiles, peeling paint, and a door that squeaks with the slightest push. Each imperfection is a canvas for subtle transformation. I chuckle softly. The door's squeak sounds almost conspiratorial, like it's sharing secrets about the building's forgotten history. Curiosity, humor, and patience blend seamlessly in this quiet exploration. I cross paths with a tenant, an elderly man who seems both bemused and curious about my presence. We exchange pleasantries, and I quietly note his observations and small complaints. Scholars still argue about the power of listening in negotiations, and I'm beginning to see why. Subtle awareness of others' perspectives is an invisible lever that can shift outcomes without confrontation. Humor surfaces again. The tenant mispronounces my name, creating a playful nickname, and I smile softly, noting that even these tiny human quirks add texture to my unfolding plan. The afternoon brings paperwork, minor inspections, and cautious phone calls. A landlord accidentally confirms a minor discrepancy I had been tracking for months, an oversight that I can now use strategically. I smile quietly, the satisfaction subtle yet immense. Humor flits through my thoughts. I imagine Aunt Marge's expression if she ever realized how a single overlooked clause quietly worked against her, and I chuckle softly. Scholars still debate whether stealth or transparency better ensures long-term success, but my approach feels deliberate and right. Later, I discover a small anomaly in a neglected courtyard behind one property. An old half-buried gate leads to a hidden nook filled with broken tiles and debris. I step carefully, inhaling the musty scent of earth and aged wood. Humor creeps in. I picture tiny woodland creatures holding a council to assess my presence, nodding solemnly at my careful steps. Each odd detail, the gate's rusted hinges, the echo of my footsteps, the faint scent of forgotten flowers, adds texture to the world, making every small discovery feel like an adventure. Evening falls, and I sit at my desk, cross-referencing deeds, leases, and notes. Each subtle adjustment, clarifying a clause here, confirming a boundary there, feels like a brushstroke painting a larger picture. Humor drifts in, imagining my relatives fumbling through property maps, utterly unaware of the web I've quietly woven, brings a gentle, private satisfaction. Scholars still debate whether observation or action drives results, but tonight both seem inseparable, harmonizing in quiet rhythm. Night arrives, draping the city in soft shadows. I walk to the balcony, letting the hum of distant traffic and occasional dog bark anchor me. Each property, each minor success, each subtle maneuver has become a note in the quiet symphony that only I can hear. Humor, patience, and observation guide every step. Even mundane details, the faint squeak of a floorboard, the smell of brewing tea, the distant clatter of a door, blend seamlessly into the rhythm of strategic progress. I whisper softly to myself, every quiet step moves the whole game forward. The morning light is soft, filtered through sheer curtains, as I sip my coffee and review the week's acquisitions. Each property, once dismissed or forgotten, now carries potential, quietly stitched together into a lattice of influence. I run a finger along the edge of a property map, imagining the tenants who will occupy these spaces, the small changes I will implement, the subtle control I am accumulating. Scholars still debate whether structure or flexibility drives success, but in this quiet orchestration, both flow together seamlessly. Humor drifts into my mind. I picture Uncle Mark trying to follow my meticulously color-coded notes, his confusion almost cinematic. Later, I visit a small townhouse with an unexpectedly charming garden. The air is tinged with the scent of damp earth and fading flowers, a surprisingly grounding contrast to the sterile city street. I run my hands along the Rottian gate, noting the tiny rust spots, imagining subtle renovations that will elevate the property without drawing attention. Humor sneaks in. A squirrel jumps from the fence, as if inspecting my plans, and I chuckle softly, appreciating the absurdity of wildlife as co-conspirators in my quiet strategy. Scholars still argue whether attention to minute details or overarching vision matters more, but today it feels like both are essential. Back at my apartment, I tackle leases and minor legal details. A small oversight by a previous property manager provides a subtle advantage, allowing me to strengthen tenant agreements without confrontation. I smile quietly at the irony. The very people who once doubted me are now unwittingly reinforcing my influence. Scholars still debate the ethics of leveraging others' mistakes, but I feel that foresight and diligence create opportunities that are inherently neutral until acted upon. Humor drifts through the process. A tenant mispronounces a property name in an email, inadvertently amusing me. Afternoon brings a visit to another overlooked property. The building appears ordinary from the street, but inside, the charm lies in its neglected quirks. A rickety staircase, faded wallpaper, a lone window letting in golden sunlight. I run my fingers along the banister, imagining future tenants' footsteps and the subtle renovations that will quietly enhance the space. Humor surfaces again. A loose floorboard squeaks in perfect rhythm, almost like a metronome keeping time with my progress. Scholars still argue whether intuition or careful planning governs long-term success, but here, both guide me harmoniously. While cataloging the property, I find a small, forgotten room tucked behind a storage area. Dust motes swirl in the sunlight as I sweep aside debris, revealing a space with peculiar charm. I can imagine creative uses for it: storage, a reading nook, a secret retreat for tenants, and it feels like discovering a hidden treasure. Humor drifts in. I picture Aunt Marge inspecting the room, utterly mystified by its presence, and I can't help chuckling softly. Even the mundane becomes magical when potential is uncovered quietly and deliberately. Evening finds me reviewing notes and cross-referencing deeds. Each minor acquisition, every subtle correction, every overlooked opportunity now forms a coherent narrative. The rhythm of careful observation and patient strategy is deeply satisfying. Humor punctuates my reflections. I imagine Uncle Mark frantically consulting outdated records while I silently weave together influence unnoticed. Scholars still debate the balance between slow accumulation and bold action, but tonight, quiet accumulation feels poetic. Night settles gently over the city. I walk to the balcony, the distant hum of life outside mingling with the soft rustle of curtains. Every property, every minor adjustment, every subtle maneuver hums like an invisible melody. Humor, patience, and careful observation guide each step. Even the faint squeak of a floorboard, the aroma of brewed tea, and the soft flicker of streetlights blend into a rhythm that reassures me. The long game is unfolding perfectly. I whisper softly, invisible threads weave the strongest webs. The following morning greets me with a gentle drizzle, the streets glistening as if freshly polished. I step out with the small umbrella, walking past properties I've already acquired, noting subtle changes since my last visit. A tenant sweeping a doorstep, a flower sprouting through cracked pavement, a cat perched high on a ledge, surveying its domain. Each observation, seemingly mundane, feels like a puzzle piece in a growing tapestry of influence. Scholars still debate whether attention to environment or data drives outcomes, but today, both inform my approach. Humor flits in. I imagine Aunt Marge tripping over her own expectations, utterly unaware of the quiet empire taking shape. I visit a mid-sized rental building that had been ignored for years. Inside, the creak of the floorboards punctuates each careful step. The scent of old wood mingles with faint traces of cleaning products, creating an oddly comforting atmosphere. I explore each room, noting imperfections and potential, imagining minor renovations that will elevate the property without drawing attention. Humor surfaces again. A loose doorknob jiggles exactly when I push, almost as if it's testing my patience, and I laugh softly. Scholars still argue whether persistence or adaptability determines long-term success, but in this moment, both guide my every move. Back at my apartment, I dive into contracts and tenant agreements, meticulously reviewing each clause. One minor discrepancy from a previous manager presents an opportunity to subtly strengthen my position. I smile quietly at the irony. The very people who once dismissed my competence now inadvertently reinforce it. Humor drifts in as I imagine Uncle Mark's flustered attempts to interpret these documents, muttering words like equity and escalation clause in vain. Scholars still debate the balance between stealth and overt action, but my careful strategy continues to unfold perfectly. Afternoon finds me inspecting a small, peculiar property tucked away behind ivy-covered walls. The interior is ordinary, yet an unexpected loft space reveals itself, dusty but full of potential. Sunlight catches on a crack in the window, scattering tiny rainbows across the floor. Humor sneaks in. I picture Aunt Marge and Uncle Mark peeking over the fence, utterly confused by my meticulous inspection. Scholars still argue whether small details or overarching vision shape success, but here, both converge seamlessly. Later, I receive a phone call from a tenant with a minor complaint about a leaky faucet. I listen patiently, making subtle adjustments to contracts and schedules. Even small interactions become tools in the quiet orchestration of influence. Humor drifts into my thoughts. The tenant mispronounces the property's name in a way that reminds me of a childhood joke, and I chuckle softly, appreciating the absurdity of everyday life. Scholars still debate whether relationships or structures drive outcomes, but this quiet diplomacy feels like both. As evening descends, I cross-reference all notes, acquisitions, and potential opportunities. Each minor maneuver, clarifying a lease, confirming boundaries, imagining future tenants, accumulates into a lattice of influence that my family remains blissfully unaware of. Humor punctuates my reflection. I imagine Aunt Marge checking her maps while my ledger silently hums with my strategic victories. Scholars still argue whether patience or bold action is superior, but tonight, the quiet accumulation of small advantages feels almost poetic. Night falls, and I retreat to the balcony, tea in hand. The city hums softly below, a symphony of ordinary life that contrasts with the extraordinary network of properties I now manage. Even the faint squeak of the floorboards, the aroma of brewed tea, and the distant bark of a dog blend into a rhythm that reassures me. My quiet, deliberate approach is shaping the invisible framework of influence that will soon redefine what it means to hold power. I whisper softly, even the smallest threads hold the strongest weight. The next morning arrives with an unexpected warmth, sunlight spilling through the windows, and making the dust motes in my apartment glow like tiny galaxies. I pour a cup of tea and survey my growing portfolio. Each property, each small acquisition, each subtle adjustment feels like a carefully placed note in a symphony only I can hear. Humor drifts into my thoughts. I imagine Aunt Marge measuring the sunlight with a ruler, utterly perplexed by the invisible rhythm of my progress. Scholars still debate whether methodical planning or spontaneous intuition leads to the greatest success, but today, I feel both working together. I spend the morning revisiting a townhouse with an unusually fragrant garden. The scent of damp soil and faded flowers carries a quiet serenity. As I wander among the paths, I notice tiny imperfections, a broken fence post, cracked tiles, and slightly bent gate hinges. To anyone else, they are flaws. To me, they are opportunities. I chuckle softly at the thought that Uncle Mark would never notice these small details, and yet each one is a stepping stone in the broader strategy. Scholars still argue whether observation or execution holds greater weight, but I feel the harmony of both in action. Midday brings a series of small, but meaningful negotiations. Minor repairs, tenant requests, and overlooked clauses all become tools I wield quietly, subtly, without fanfare. Humor drifts in. A tenant mispronounces a street name, creating a playful mental image that softens the seriousness of my work. Scholars still debate whether influence stems from power or perception. And I realize that quietly managing perception is an art form in itself. Each small success, each unnoticed adjustment, becomes part of a lattice of control that no one else can perceive. Later, I explore a neglected duplex, discovering a hidden loft space filled with dust and old furniture. Sunlight filters in through a cracked window, illuminating faint streaks of color on the floorboards. I imagine subtle renovations, adding character without drawing attention. Humor creeps in. A mouse scuttles across the floor as if giving me its silent approval, and I chuckle softly. Scholars still argue whether patience or audacity drives results, but I sense that the two are intertwined, quietly reinforcing each other in my carefully orchestrated plan. Evening brings reflection. I sit at my desk, reviewing notes, contracts, and property maps. Each line I trace, each minor adjustment I make, feels like weaving invisible threads connecting every corner of my growing influence. Humor drifts into my thoughts again. I picture Aunt Marge and Uncle Mark, reviewing my progress and failing to understand how each subtle move has compounded into undeniable control. Scholars still debate whether strategy or luck is more effective, but tonight, careful strategy feels like a quiet, unstoppable force. Night falls, and I step onto the balcony, sipping my tea. The city hums gently below, the distant sounds of cars, the occasional dog bark, the faint rustle of leaves. Every property, every tenant interaction, every minor tweak is part of a rhythm, a quiet orchestration of influence that no one else sees. Humor, observation, and patience guide each move. Even the faint squeak of the floorboards blends into a rhythm that reassures me. The long game is almost complete, and the empire I once dreamed of quietly unfolds. I whisper softly. Invisible steps carry the weight of mountains. By bedtime, I close my ledger and sip the last of my tea. Every property, every adjustment, every overlooked corner now hums with latent potential. Scholars still argue about whether subtlety or boldness defines ultimate success. But in my carefully constructed network, subtlety reigns supreme. The city's hum, and the distant flicker of streetlights form a lullaby of quiet triumph. Humor, patience, and meticulous attention have woven a rhythm that carries me softly toward the final act. I whisper, the pieces are in place, and the board is mine. The morning is unusually still, as if the city itself is holding its breath. I take a slow walk past my properties, noting small changes since my last visit. A freshly painted window frame, a tenant's flower pot blooming against the brick, the faint scent of morning dew on asphalt. Each observation feels like a brushstroke, painting the final layers of a picture long in progress. Humor drifts into my thoughts. I imagine Aunt Marge consulting a compass to navigate my invisible empire, utterly baffled by the precision of my moves. Scholars still debate whether timing or preparation matters most, but today, I feel both aligned perfectly. I spend the day finalizing the acquisition of my largest property yet, the one that had been considered the crown jewel by my family for decades. The paperwork is meticulous. Signatures, notaries, minor clauses I've honed over months. Each stroke of the pen carries the weight of quiet triumph. Humor surfaces as I imagine Uncle Mark pacing nervously in his study, entirely unaware that his own empire has been quietly absorbed into mine. Scholars still argue whether visible confrontation or silent strategy yields more lasting power, but this victory is silent, invisible, and utterly satisfying. Mid-afternoon, I wander through the newly acquired property, noticing quirks and hidden corners. A rickety staircase, a small attic window, a faint smell of old wood and dust, all become potential playgrounds for minor renovations. Humor creeps in. I picture a family reunion held in the attic, everyone squinting and asking how I got control over a place they thought was untouchable. Scholars still debate whether small, incremental adjustments or bold, sweeping actions lead to mastery, but this quiet, detailed approach has brought me here, unchallenged. Later, I make a series of subtle adjustments across all my properties, minor lease changes, small renovations, and tenant updates. Every move reinforces the lattice of influence I've built over months. Humor drifts in again. I imagine Aunt Marge tripping over her own assumptions, while I sip tea in quiet satisfaction. Scholars still argue whether control or perception is more critical, but in this moment, both converge, invisible and undeniable. Evening falls, and I walk through a courtyard that spans several properties I now own. The faint hum of distant traffic, the cooing of pigeons, the rustle of leaves in the wind, all blend into a soft rhythm. I run my fingers along worn bricks, inhale the faint scent of earth and dust, and imagine the ripple effect my actions will have on my family. Humor surfaces once more. A loose shutter flaps in the wind, like it's applauding my silent victory. Scholars still debate the balance between patience and boldness, but tonight I feel the harmony of both. Night deepens. I sit on the balcony, tea in hand, reviewing the ledger of acquisitions one last time. Every property, every minor adjustment, every unnoticed maneuver now forms a coherent and undeniable empire. Humor, patience, and careful observation have guided me, softening tension while amplifying control. The city hums below, distant yet alive, blending with the gentle rustle of curtains and the faint tick of a clock. I whisper softly, the board is complete, the pieces aligned, and the quiet empire stands. As the night deepens, I let the rhythm slow. The city's hum softens, the occasional car passing by like a distant drumbeat. The breeze brushing gently against the window panes. I take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the room settle into my shoulders, the subtle aroma of tea lingering in the air. Every small victory, every detail observed and attended to, floats quietly in my mind, forming a soft cloud of satisfaction and calm. Humor lingers at the edges, a gentle reminder that even triumphs can be tender and that patience, observation, and subtlety carry their own quiet joy. I allow myself to sink into the softness of the moment, the faint creak of a floorboard, the whisper of curtains against the window, even the distant bark of a dog, all blend into a lullaby of ordinary life, grounding and reassuring. My properties, once overlooked, now hum with potential, each corner a quiet testament to careful planning and deliberate attention. Scholars still debate whether luck, timing, or strategy shapes destiny, but here, in the hush of night, I feel certainty. Every small step, every deliberate act, has created a quiet but unshakable foundation. Finally, I close my eyes, letting the gentle rhythm of the night wash over me. The faint glow of streetlights fades into memory, the hum of life softens, and a sense of calm triumph fills me. Humor, patience, and quiet observation have guided every move, crafting an empire unseen but unassailable. The soft cadence of the evening carries me into a restful peace, the edges of the day fading slowly into the comforting dark. I whisper one last time, gently and softly, all is in place, and the world is quietly mine.